Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, you are about to immerse yourself in calming Buddhist wisdom, delivered through timeless Zen stories designed to melt away anxiety and guide you toward deep, restorative sleep. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm going to share a carefully selected collection of these profound narratives, each one a powerful insight, revealing the quiet power within you to find tranquility and true ease of being. These aren't merely tales, they are ancient teachings from masters who understood the mechanics of the mind and how to gently disarm the relentless grip of worry. As the Buddha taught, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Tonight, these stories will reveal how the very worries that keep you restless can begin to dissolve, paving the way for comfort, clarity, and the deep sleep you seek. As you listen and allow these stories to wash over you, notice a subtle yet profound shift. The tight knots of anxiety will begin to unravel. The constant chatter of your thoughts will softly recede. You will find yourself settling naturally into a state of profound peace, inviting the stillness needed for deep rest. So settle in deeply now. Let your body sink into whatever supports you. Take one conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, know that you're about to receive wisdom that has soothed hearts and minds for centuries, teachings ready to bring you peace and quiet tonight. Let us begin with a story about the nature of mental control and the wisdom of non-resistance. A governor who prided himself on his disciplined mind once visited Master Yangguan. The governor had spent years perfecting what he believed was a superior meditation technique, the ability to forcefully suppress unwanted thoughts and emotions during his practice. "Master," the governor said with evident satisfaction, "I have developed remarkable control over my mind. When disturbing thoughts arise during meditation, I simply push them down until they disappear. Through this method, I maintain perfect stillness and clarity." Yangguan listened patiently to the governor's explanation, nodding thoughtfully. Then, without comment, he gestured toward a large gourd that was floating peacefully in a basin of water nearby. The gourd bobbed gently on the surface, catching the afternoon light. "Honorable Governor," Yangguan said calmly, "would you do something for me? Please take that gourd and, using only your hands, hold it down at the bottom of the basin so that it remains completely still." Though puzzled by the strange request, the governor approached the basin. He grasped the buoyant gourd firmly and pushed it beneath the surface of the water. Immediately, he could feel the gourd's natural tendency to rise. It pressed upward against his hands with surprising force, requiring considerable effort to keep submerged. The governor concentrated harder, applying more pressure. But the moment his grip relaxed even slightly, the gourd shot violently back to the surface, breaking through the water with a splash. He tried again, this time using both hands to force the gourd down. Still, it fought against him, and when he momentarily loosened his hold, it burst upward even more forcefully than before. Again and again he attempted this task. Each time, the gourd's resistance seemed to grow stronger. The more force he applied, the more violently it rebounded when his control wavered. Soon, the governor was breathing heavily, frustrated by his inability to keep the simple gourd submerged. Finally, exhausted and defeated, he stepped back from the basin. "Master," he admitted, It cannot be done. The gourd's nature is to float. No matter how hard I try to suppress it, it will always return to the surface. Yang Guan smiled with gentle understanding. Your thoughts are exactly like this gourd, my friend. The more you try to force them down, the more violently they will spring back up when your vigilance wavers. Fighting with your mind only creates greater disturbance. The master gestured to the gourd, which had returned to floating peacefully on the water's surface. Instead of struggling against your thoughts, simply observe them as they float upon the water of your awareness. In not fighting with them, you will discover a peace that requires no effort to maintain. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, what we resist persists. What we accept transforms. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the fundamental difference between suppression and awareness. The governor's approach represents our common tendency to treat unwanted thoughts and emotions as enemies to be conquered rather than natural phenomena to be observed. Why do we instinctively try to control our mental experiences through force? Zen Buddhism points to our deep conditioning that equates strength with control and peace with the absence of disturbance. We believe that a quiet mind means a mind from which all unwanted content has been eliminated. This creates an adversarial relationship with our own consciousness, turning meditation into a battle rather than a practice of acceptance. Consider how this pattern manifests in daily life. When anxiety arises, we often try to push it away or distract ourselves from it. When anger emerges, we either suppress it completely or judge ourselves harshly for feeling it. When sadness appears, we rush to fix it or make it disappear. Like the governor with his gourd, we exhaust ourselves, trying to force our emotional life into submission. The deeper teaching here shows us that thoughts and emotions are like weather patterns in the sky of consciousness. They arise naturally, move through our awareness, and dissolve on their own when not interfered with. The problem is not their presence, but our resistance to them. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. This paradox points to the delicate balance between acceptance and growth. We don't need to eliminate our humanity to find peace. We need to relate to it skillfully. The gourd floating on water represents the natural state of mind when we're not forcing anything. Thoughts arise and pass away like waves on the ocean's surface. The water itself remains undisturbed by what floats upon it. Similarly, our essential awareness remains peaceful regardless of what mental content appears within it. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to our inner life. Rather, it means developing what Zen calls effortless effort, a quality of alert, relaxed attention that neither grasps after pleasant states nor pushes away difficult ones. Like learning to float in water, it requires us to stop struggling and trust in our natural buoyancy. Tonight, as you notice your mind's activity, can you resist the urge to control what arises? Perhaps you'll observe thoughts floating like gourds on the surface of your awareness, neither pushing them down nor being carried away by them. Simply watching, simply breathing, simply being present with whatever appears. As the Buddha taught, letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness. In releasing our grip on the gourd of mental control, we discover the peace that was always available beneath our struggle. Let us continue our journey with a tale about the difference between spiritual states and spiritual presence. Master Xishuang had gathered around him a community of monks known throughout the region for their unwavering dedication to sitting meditation. Day after day, year after year, these devoted practitioners would sit in perfect stillness on their cushions, barely moving, seeking enlightenment through the cultivation of profound inner quiet. For 20 years, they maintained this rigorous practice under their beloved master's guidance. The monastery became famous for the depth of its silence and the commitment of its residents. Visitors would often remark on the atmosphere of serene concentration that permeated every corner of the temple grounds. When the old master finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, many people throughout the province wondered which of his dedicated students had achieved true realization. Surely among such devoted practitioners, someone must have attained the enlightenment they had all sought so earnestly. A new master arrived to lead the community. He was known for his direct teaching style and his ability to see through spiritual pretense. On his first day, he called for the head monk, who had been with Master Xishuang longer than anyone else, and was revered by the other monks for his unwavering discipline. "The old master has passed from this world," the new teacher said gently. "Tell me, where is he now?" The head monk, despite his decades of practice, found himself unable to answer. He remained silent, searching his mind for some appropriate response but finding nothing authentic to offer. The new master waited patiently, then asked another question. "You have been here for 20 years, practicing diligently every day. Tell me, what were you doing during all that time?" The head monk's face brightened, feeling more confident about this question. "Master, I cultivated a state of serene stillness. I became like a piece of dead ash, cool and undisturbed. Through my meditation, I transcended all coming and going, all movement and change. I achieved a profound inner peace beyond the ordinary world." The new master listened carefully to this description, then shook his head slowly. "That is not it," he said softly. "True stillness is not a special state you achieve through effort. It is not something you attain or lose. It is simply this moment, exactly as it is, right now." Curious about something, the master then walked to the monastery kitchen, where he found the cook preparing the evening meal. The cook was a simple man who had worked at the monastery for many years, quietly going about his duties without any pretense of spiritual attainment. The master asked him the same question he had posed to the head monk. "Tell me, where have you been all day? What have you been doing?" The cook looked up from his chopping, slightly surprised by the question. Without any hesitation or self-consciousness, he replied simply, "I have been here in the kitchen, cooking, preparing vegetables, making rice, cleaning pots. Just cooking." The master nodded with evident satisfaction, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The answer was complete and perfect in its ordinariness. As the Buddha observed, "Wherever you are, be there totally." What emerges from this story is a fundamental teaching about the difference between seeking spiritual experiences and embodying spiritual presence. The head monk had mistaken a particular meditative state for enlightenment itself, while the cook demonstrated true realization through his complete engagement with simple, immediate tasks. Why do we often confuse spiritual states with spiritual awakening? Buddhist psychology explains that the mind naturally seeks extraordinary experiences as proof of progress. We imagine that enlightenment must feel different from ordinary consciousness, that it must be characterized by special phenomena or elevated states of being. This creates what Zen calls the stink of enlightenment, the subtle pride that comes from spiritual attainment. The head monk had cultivated a genuine meditative state, but he had also developed an identity around that accomplishment. He had become someone who transcended ordinary experience, which paradoxically trapped him in a very ordinary form of ego clinging. The cook, by contrast, made no claims about his spiritual status. He simply showed up completely for whatever life asked of him. In washing rice, he was fully present with washing rice. In chopping vegetables, his entire being was engaged with chopping vegetables. This total presence with simple tasks is what Zen calls just this moment. The recognition that enlightenment is not an experience we have, but a quality of attention we embody. Zen Master Dogen taught, practice and enlightenment are one. This means that awakening is not the goal of practice, but the very quality of wholehearted engagement itself. We don't sit in meditation to achieve enlightenment. We sit in meditation as an expression of our inherent wholeness. Consider your own relationship to ordinary activities. How often do you approach daily tasks as obstacles to something more meaningful? How often do you wait for special moments to be fully present, treating routine responsibilities as spiritual distractions rather than opportunities for awakening? The Buddha said, "Every moment contains the whole of life." This insight reveals that washing dishes can be as sacred as sitting in meditation, that preparing food can be as profound as studying ancient texts. The question is not what we're doing, but how completely we're doing it. Tonight, as you move through your final activities before sleep, perhaps brushing your teeth, adjusting your pillow, or simply breathing, can you meet these simple actions with the same wholehearted presence the cook brought to his kitchen work? In this willingness to be fully here with what is actually happening, we discover that ordinary life is the very field of awakening. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." The peace the head monk sought through transcending ordinary experience was available all along in the simple willingness to be completely present with life as it unfolds, moment by moment. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story about receiving teachings from the natural world. A young monk had traveled many days through mountainous terrain to study with the revered Master Dogen, whose reputation for wisdom had spread throughout Japan. The monk carried with him many questions about enlightenment and high hopes for the profound teachings he would receive. As he made his way through a deep mountain valley on the final day of his journey, something unexpected happened. The sound of a stream running through the valley below caught his attention. At first, it was merely background noise, but as he paused on the path to rest, the sound seemed to grow clearer and more present. The water moved over rocks and around bends with a constant musical voice. There was something in that sound that pulled the monk deeper and deeper into listening. He found a large boulder beside the path and sat down, closing his eyes to focus entirely on what he was hearing. Minutes passed, then an hour. The stream's voice seemed to wash through him, dissolving his thoughts about the master he was going to meet, his questions about Buddhist doctrine, his identity as a monk seeking enlightenment. The clear, constant sound filled his awareness so completely that there was no room left for the usual mental commentary that typically occupied his mind. For a long while, he simply sat and listened. There was only the sound of water flowing over stone, only this immediate, intimate encounter with something utterly simple and utterly present. In that listening, something profound shifted in his understanding, though he could not have explained what had changed. When he finally opened his eyes, the young monk felt as if he had awakened from a dream. The world around him seemed more vivid, more immediate than before. He continued on his journey with a quiet smile, no longer hurrying toward his destination. Upon arriving at Dogen's monastery, he was eventually granted an audience with the great master. Dogen sat before him in simple brown robes, his presence radiating a quality of deep peace and attentiveness. "Welcome, young monk," Dogen said warmly. "You have traveled far to study here. Tell me, what is the most profound teaching you have ever received?" The monk thought carefully about this question. He could have mentioned learned discourses he had heard, or sacred texts he had studied, or instructions he had received from various teachers during his years of training. Instead, he found himself saying with quiet certainty, "Master, the most profound teaching I have ever received was the sound of the valley stream I heard while walking here today." Dogen's eyes lit up immediately with recognition and understanding. A smile of deep appreciation spread across his face as he bowed slightly to his visitor. "You have already met the greatest of all teachers," Dogen said with evident delight. "You have received direct transmission from reality itself. There is very little I can add to such teaching." In that moment, the young monk understood something that would have been impossible to explain in words. Enlightenment was not something a human teacher gives to a student, not something found in books or achieved through techniques. It was this immediate, direct experience of reality that had always been available, as present and clear as water flowing over mountain stones. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, "Look within, you are the Buddha." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth that our deepest teacher is not separate from us or from the natural world around us. The stream in this story represents the constant teaching that flows through every moment of our experience when we know how to listen. Why do we so often overlook the teachings that surround us constantly? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning to believe that wisdom comes from authorities, from books, from special people in special places. We develop what might be called teacher dependency, imagining that enlightenment is something that others possess and must transmit to us through complex instructions or esoteric knowledge. This orientation causes us to miss the immediate teachings available in each moment. The way morning light falls through a window, the rhythm of our own breathing, the feeling of our feet touching the ground. These experiences offer direct insight into the nature of reality, but we dismiss them as mundane while seeking something more exotic or dramatic. Zen master John Daido Loori taught, "The whole universe is medicine." Every aspect of our experience, from the most sublime to the most ordinary, offers opportunities for awakening when met with appropriate attention. The stream taught the monk something that no human teacher could convey, the immediate, intimate reality of this moment. The deeper teaching here shows us that enlightenment is not an acquisition, but a recognition. It's not something we get from outside ourselves, but something we uncover within our direct experience. The monk's listening to the stream was not passive, but profoundly receptive, allowing the sound to teach him about presence, flow, and the nature of awareness itself. Consider the sounds in your own environment right now. Perhaps there's the whisper of wind, the distant hum of traffic, or simply the quiet of the night. These sounds, like the mountain stream, are constantly offering teachings about impermanence, interconnectedness, and the immediacy of this moment. But we typically treat them as background noise to our more important mental activities. The Buddha said, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. The truth the monk discovered by the stream was not hidden in complex philosophy, but completely obvious in direct experience. It required only the willingness to listen with his whole being, rather than filtering everything through conceptual understanding. Tonight, as you settle into rest, can you allow yourself to be taught by the immediate sounds and sensations of this moment? Perhaps you'll discover, like the monk by the stream, that the greatest teachings are not found in seeking something extraordinary, but in receiving what is always already here. As the Buddha taught, wherever you go, there you are. The wisdom we seek is not waiting for us in distant monasteries or ancient texts, but flowing constantly through the stream of present moment awareness. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the nature of mind and the futility of trying to grasp the ungraspable. An earnest student approached Master Fayan with a question that had been troubling him for months. He had been studying Buddhist philosophy diligently, attending teachings regularly, and practicing meditation with sincere dedication. Yet despite all his efforts, one fundamental teaching continued to elude his understanding. "Master," the student said, bowing respectfully, "I have been studying the Dharma for a long time now, but I remain confused by the teaching that mind itself is Buddha. I have read about this in texts, heard it explained in lectures, and contemplated it during my meditation practice. Still, I cannot grasp what this means. How can I understand this truth?" The student's frustration was evident in his voice. Like many sincere practitioners, he had approached this profound teaching as an intellectual puzzle to be solved, a concept to be comprehended through analysis and effort. He waited expectantly for Master Fayan to provide some explanation that would finally make everything clear. Instead of offering a complex philosophical discourse or pointing to ancient scriptures, Master Fayan simply turned his attention to the monastery garden visible through the doorway. Without a word, he pointed to a stone lion that stood among the carefully tended plants and walkways. The stone lion was an ancient piece of carved granite that had watched over the garden for generations. Its surface was weathered smooth by countless seasons of rain and sun, its features softened by time, yet still maintaining a presence of quiet dignity. "You are asking me about the nature of mind," Fayan said calmly, his finger still pointing toward the garden. "Before we discuss such profound matters, tell me something simpler. What is the price of that stone lion?" The student turned to look at the statue, completely bewildered by this unexpected question. He had come seeking wisdom about the deepest mysteries of consciousness, only to be asked about the monetary value of garden decoration. What could this possibly have to do with understanding mind and Buddha nature? "Master," the student replied with obvious confusion, "it is a stone lion. It has been part of this monastery for as long as anyone can remember. It is not for sale. It has no price." Master Fayan nodded gently, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just so," he said with quiet satisfaction. "You have answered perfectly." The student waited for further explanation, but none came. Finally, growing even more confused, he pressed his teacher. "But Master, I don't understand. What does the stone lion have to do with my question about mind being Buddha?" Fayan looked directly into the student's eyes with great kindness. "You ask me about the nature of mind, yet you approach it as if it were a commodity to be purchased with your effort and understanding. If you try to give mind a value, to grasp it, to define it, to own it through intellectual comprehension, you miss it entirely. He gestured again toward the stone lion. That statue is priceless because it is not an object to be bought or sold. It simply exists as it is, requiring nothing from us except perhaps our appreciation. Similarly, your Buddha nature is priceless because it cannot be acquired through study or practice. It is not something you can obtain or lose. The master paused, allowing his words to settle. Stop trying to appraise your mind. Stop trying to capture enlightenment like a marketplace transaction. When you cease attempting to purchase what was never for sale, understanding will dawn naturally. The Buddha taught, "You are what you seek." Here we discover a fundamental truth about the spiritual journey. The very thing we are searching for is the one who is searching. The student's confusion arose from treating Buddha nature as an object separate from himself, something external to be understood and acquired through effort. Why do we instinctively approach our own consciousness as if it were foreign territory to be conquered? Buddhist psychology reveals our deep conditioning to relate to everything, including spiritual realization, through the paradigm of obtaining and possessing. We bring marketplace mentality to the sacred, imagining that enlightenment can be earned, bought with practice, or accumulated through knowledge. This creates what Zen calls picking up a stone and throwing it at the moon. We use the very faculty we're trying to understand, mind itself, to grasp something that cannot be objectified. It's like trying to see your own eyes or bite your own teeth. The attempt itself creates the illusion of separation between seeker and sought. The stone lion represents what the Chinese call ziran, natural spontaneous being. It doesn't try to be a lion. It simply is what it is without effort or self-consciousness. Similarly, your Buddha nature doesn't need to be achieved or understood. It is simply the aware presence that is reading these words right now. Zen teacher Alan Watts often spoke about the backwards law, the idea that the more we chase something, the more it eludes us. Happiness cannot be pursued directly. It arises naturally when we stop frantically seeking it. Peace cannot be forced. It emerges when we cease creating conflict. Understanding of mind cannot be grasped. It reveals itself when we stop trying to capture it intellectually. This doesn't mean abandoning practice or study, but rather understanding their true purpose. We don't meditate to get enlightenment. We meditate to express the enlightenment that is our natural state. We don't study Dharma to acquire wisdom. We study to remove the misconceptions that obscure our inherent clarity. Consider how this pattern appears in your own spiritual seeking. How often do you evaluate your meditation based on what you gained from it? How frequently do you measure your progress by some imagined standard of attainment? This very measuring mind is what creates distance from the intimate reality of this moment. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." The within he speaks of is not a location inside your body or mind, but the immediate intimacy of present awareness that requires no seeking because it is never absent. Tonight, as you rest in the simplicity of breathing, can you stop trying to price the priceless? Can you simply be present with awareness itself without needing to understand, grasp, or evaluate it? Like the stone lion in the garden, your essential nature asks nothing of you, except perhaps recognition and appreciation. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." This includes loving the awareness that you are, not for what it can achieve or understand, but simply because it is the most intimate, immediate, and ongoing miracle of your existence. Our next story reveals a profound teaching about equanimity and non-attachment through the life of Master Hakuin. Hakuin was revered throughout his region as a pure and virtuous teacher whose simple life and gentle wisdom had touched many hearts. He lived quietly in his small temple, leading a community of students in meditation and offering guidance to anyone who sought his counsel. Near the temple lived a beautiful young woman whose parents owned a prosperous food store in the village. She was known for her grace and intelligence, and many young men had hoped to win her affection. The family was well respected, and they had high expectations for their daughter's future. One day, without any warning or explanation, the girl's parents discovered that she was pregnant. This news sent shockwaves through their household and the entire community. In that time and place, such a situation brought tremendous shame upon a family, potentially destroying their reputation and livelihood. Her parents were furious and demanded to know who was responsible for their daughter's condition. At first, the young woman refused to reveal the father's identity, remaining silent despite their increasingly desperate pleas and angry accusations. The pressure from her family became unbearable as days passed without any explanation. Finally, unable to withstand any more harassment, the frightened girl spoke a name that stunned everyone who heard it. She claimed that the father was Master Hakuin himself, the respected Zen teacher whom the entire community held in the highest regard. The parents were outraged beyond measure. How could this revered spiritual teacher have violated their daughter and brought such disgrace upon their family? In great anger, they stormed to Hakuin's temple, their hearts burning with betrayal and righteous indignation. "Master Hakuin!" they shouted, their voices carrying across the temple grounds. "Our daughter says you are the father of her child. How could you do such a thing? You have destroyed our family's honor." Hakuin listened calmly to their accusations, his face showing neither surprise nor defensiveness. When they had finished expressing their rage, he responded with only 3 quiet words. "Is that so?" The parents were astounded by his response. They had expected denials, explanations, or at least some sign of emotion. Instead, the master simply accepted their accusation with apparent equanimity, offering neither confirmation nor protest. Word of this scandal spread quickly throughout the village and beyond. Hakuin's reputation, built over decades of selfless service and teaching, crumbled overnight. Students left his temple, supporters withdrew their assistance, and former admirers turned away in disgust and disappointment. The respected master became an object of scorn and whisper. When the child was born, the parents brought the baby directly to Hakuin, thrusting the infant into his arms with bitter satisfaction. "Here is your responsibility," they declared coldly. "Now you must care for what you have created." Hakuin received the child with the same calm acceptance he had shown throughout the ordeal. "Is that so?" he said again, gently, cradling the baby with tender care. Despite having lost his sterling reputation and most of his worldly support, Hakuin dedicated himself completely to caring for the infant. He went from door to door in the village, humbly asking for milk and whatever else the child needed. Many people turned him away with harsh words, but he persisted without complaint, ensuring the baby received proper nourishment and care. For an entire year, Hakuin raised the child with devoted attention. He seemed genuinely untroubled by the loss of his reputation or the dramatic change in his circumstances. His focus remained entirely on meeting the immediate needs of the small life in his care. As months passed, the young mother found herself increasingly tormented by guilt and remorse. She had destroyed an innocent man's life to protect herself, and watching him care so lovingly for a child that wasn't his became unbearable. The weight of her deception finally became too much to carry. Unable to continue the lie any longer, she confessed the truth to her parents. The real father of her child was a young man who worked in the village fish market. They had been meeting in secret, and when she discovered her pregnancy, fear had driven her to name the first respectable person she could think of, rather than reveal her actual relationship. Horrified by what they had done to an innocent man, the parents rushed back to Hakuin's temple. They fell to their knees before the master, begging his forgiveness and offering elaborate apologies for the terrible injustice they had caused him. "Master, we are so ashamed," they pleaded. "Our daughter has told us the truth. You are not the father. We have wronged you terribly and destroyed your reputation for no reason. Please forgive us, and please allow us to take the child back where he belongs." Hakuin listened to their apologies with the same serene attention he had given their original accusations. When they asked for the child back, he willingly placed the baby in their arms. His response was identical to what he had said a year earlier. "Is that so?" The Buddha once said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." This tale unveils the profound teaching of complete equanimity in the face of life's inevitable reversals. Hakuin's consistent response reveals a mind that had transcended attachment to reputation, circumstances, and even concepts of justice and injustice. Why do we find such equanimity so difficult to embody? Buddhist psychology explains that our sense of self depends heavily on external validation and circumstances aligning with our preferences. When our reputation is attacked or our situation deteriorates, we experience it as a threat to our very identity. We fight to defend our image, justify our actions, and control how others perceive us. Hakuin demonstrated what Zen calls great doubt, not skepticism, but a profound letting go of fixed positions about how life should unfold. His "is that so?" represents complete receptivity to whatever arises, without the mental commentary that typically creates suffering around our experiences. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to injustice. Rather, it points toward what the Buddha called right action arising from right understanding. When we're not caught up in defending our ego or controlling outcomes, we can respond to situations with clarity and compassion rather than reactivity. The deeper teaching here shows us that our true nature remains untouched by the changing circumstances of our lives. Reputation comes and goes, people praise and blame us, situations improve and deteriorate, but the awareness that witnesses all these changes remains constant and peaceful. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." Hakuin embodied this paradox perfectly, taking complete responsibility for the child while maintaining inner freedom from the drama surrounding the situation. Consider how you typically respond to false accusations, unfair treatment, or sudden changes in your circumstances. Do you immediately move into defense, explanation, or attempts to control how others view the situation? Can you imagine responding to life's reversals with Hakuin's gentle acceptance? Tonight, as you reflect on the day's events, perhaps you can practice releasing attachment to how things should have been and simply acknowledge what actually occurred. When the mind begins its familiar commentary about fairness or unfairness, you might quietly ask yourself, like Hakuin, is that so? As the Buddha taught, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. True peace comes not from having circumstances align with our preferences, but from meeting whatever arises with the spacious acceptance that recognizes all experiences as temporary visitors in the vast sky of awareness. As we continue on our journey, we encounter a teaching about radical acceptance and the wisdom of taking responsibility even for wrongs we haven't committed. This is The Innocent Thief. Master Ryokan, beloved for his gentle nature and profound compassion, had spent the morning walking through nearby villages with his begging bowl, seeking simple donations of food that would sustain his humble existence. His appearance was unremarkable. The worn robes of a wandering monk, a peaceful demeanor that suggested harmlessness, and the kind of open face that usually inspired trust rather than suspicion. When he approached a particular household that afternoon, he was unaware that the residents had recently experienced a troubling incident. An object of some value had gone missing from their home just days before, and the family was still upset about the theft, suspicious of any strangers who might pass by their property. The moment the householders saw this unfamiliar monk approaching with his begging bowl, suspicion flared into accusation. Here was a stranger, clearly without means, appearing shortly after their valuable possession had disappeared. The timing seemed too coincidental to ignore, and in their distress and anger over the recent theft, they immediately concluded that this humble monk must be the culprit. Without allowing Master Ryokan any opportunity to explain his presence or defend himself, the householder summoned help and had the master bound hand and foot like a common criminal. They tied the ropes tightly, making no effort to be gentle with someone they were convinced had wronged them. Throughout this entire ordeal, Master Ryokan offered no resistance whatsoever. He didn't protest his innocence, didn't demand to know what crime he was being accused of, didn't point out the lack of evidence or the injustice of being condemned without trial. Instead, he simply hung his head in silence, accepting whatever treatment these angry people felt compelled to impose upon him. The master remained bound for some time, enduring both the physical discomfort of the ropes and the emotional pain of being treated as a criminal when he had come only seeking a small donation of food to sustain his spiritual practice. He bore this suffering with the same equanimity he brought to meditation, neither struggling against his bonds nor harboring resentment toward his captors. By fortunate coincidence, an acquaintance of Master Ryokan happened to pass by the house and recognized the bound figure. This person knew the master's character and reputation for honesty and gentleness, and immediately realized that some terrible mistake had been made. Through patient explanation and vouching for the master's character, this friend was able to secure Ryokan's release. As the ropes were finally removed and circulation returned to his hands and feet, the acquaintance confronted the master with obvious bewilderment and frustration. "Why didn't you tell them you were innocent?" he demanded. "You could have explained who you are, where you came from, what you were doing there. Why did you just sit there and let them treat you like a criminal when a few words could have cleared up this entire misunderstanding?" Master Ryokan looked up at his concerned friend with eyes that held no anger, no sense of victimization, no desire for revenge against those who had wronged him. "Even if I'd explained," he replied, with the quiet wisdom of someone who understood something profound about human nature and the futility of certain kinds of resistance, "I wouldn't have been let off. Best not to make any explanations and just hope for the best." The Buddha understood that hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is a law eternal. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the radical acceptance that can transform conflict into peace, and the profound wisdom of taking responsibility even for circumstances we haven't created. This ancient wisdom illuminates a revolutionary approach to injustice and false accusation that challenges our every instinct about self-defense and righteous indignation. Most of us, when wrongly accused, feel compelled to protest our innocence, to provide evidence, to demand fair treatment, and to ensure that the truth is recognized and acknowledged. Master Ryokan's response reveals an understanding that goes beyond conventional ideas about justice and self-preservation. He recognized that when people are caught in the grip of suspicion and anger, rational explanations often have little power to change their minds. His silence wasn't passive resignation, but active wisdom. The recognition that sometimes accepting undeserved suffering creates possibilities for transformation that resistance and argument cannot achieve. Why do we find it so difficult to accept blame for things we haven't done? This resistance stems from our deep attachment to being seen as good people, to maintaining our reputation and self-image, and to ensuring that justice is served according to our understanding of fairness. But the Master's approach suggests that these attachments can actually prevent us from responding to difficult situations with maximum wisdom and compassion. His explanation, "Even if I'd explained, I wouldn't have been let off," demonstrates profound insight into human psychology. When people are convinced of our guilt, our denials often sound like exactly what guilty people would say. The more vigorously we protest our innocence, the more suspicious we can appear to those who have already decided we're culpable. This teaching reveals the difference between being right and being wise. Master Ryokan was certainly right to protest his innocence, but he was wise enough to recognize that being right wouldn't necessarily lead to being released, and might actually make the situation worse by provoking further anger from people who interpreted his protests as dishonesty or arrogance. We can observe similar dynamics in many areas of human conflict. The employee falsely accused of poor performance who becomes defensive and argumentative, thereby confirming their supervisor's negative impression. The family member wrongly blamed for relationship problems, who responds with angry self-justification, escalating the very conflicts they're trying to resolve. This story also points us toward understanding the power of radical acceptance in transforming our relationship to suffering. By not fighting against his circumstances, Master Ryokan avoided the additional suffering that comes from resistance, resentment, and the desperate need to prove our case to unreceptive audiences. Zen practice cultivates what might be called choiceless acceptance, the ability to receive whatever life presents without immediately strategizing about how to change it, fix it, or escape from it. This doesn't mean passive resignation to genuine injustice, but rather the wisdom to recognize when acceptance might be more effective than resistance. The Master's gentle response to his friend's bewilderment, "Best not to make any explanations and just hope for the best," reveals another layer of wisdom. Sometimes our deepest service to others involves allowing them to work through their anger and suspicion without giving them additional targets for their upset. His silence provided space for their emotions to resolve naturally rather than escalating through argument. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that being misunderstood is one of the worst things that can happen to us. But Master Ryokan's story suggests that being misunderstood and accepting that misunderstanding with grace can actually be a form of spiritual service, a way of absorbing negativity that might otherwise continue to spread through reactive cycles of blame and defense. This teaching also reveals the difference between self-respect and ego protection. The master's willingness to be bound and accused didn't reflect low self-esteem, but rather such secure self-knowledge that external accusations couldn't threaten his inner peace or understanding of his own nature. Beyond this, there emerges a profound teaching about the courage required for complete nonviolence. It's relatively easy to be nonviolent when we're treated fairly, but Master Ryokan demonstrated the kind of deep nonviolence that remains stable even when we're treated unjustly. Tonight, as you consider situations where you feel wrongly accused, misunderstood, or blamed for things you haven't done, can you experiment with the kind of acceptance Master Ryokan demonstrated? What would it mean to respond to unfair treatment with silence and patience rather than immediate self-defense and justification? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most peaceful response to accusations and misunderstanding is the profound word of silence, not the silence of defeat or resignation, but the silence of wisdom that refuses to add more conflict to an already difficult situation. Let us explore a story about the profound distinction between spiritual authority and worldly power. This is the Emperor's invitation. In the mountains of Japan, where ancient pines whispered secrets to the wind, lived Master Taigu, a Zen teacher whose realization had become legendary throughout the land. His understanding of the Dharma was so profound that even learned scholars would travel great distances just to sit in his presence for a few moments. Word of his wisdom eventually reached the retired Emperor Go-Mizuno, a man accustomed to having the greatest minds of the realm summoned to his court. The emperor, intrigued by reports of this mountain sage, sent his most trusted messenger to Master Gudo with a request that Taigu be brought to the imperial palace for an audience. The invitation was presented with great ceremony, accompanied by silken scrolls and promises of honor. Yet when Master Gudo delivered this prestigious summons to Taigu, the master's response was immediate and unwavering. "I can be a host," Taigu declared simply, his eyes reflecting the same stillness as the mountain lake nearby. "I can never be a guest." The messenger, confused by this unexpected refusal, pressed the matter. "Master, do you understand? This is an invitation from the retired emperor himself, the greatest honor in the land." Taigu smiled gently. "That is precisely why I cannot accept. When one truly understands the Dharma, there is no position higher or lower. There is only the eternal host of truth, welcoming all who seek with genuine hearts." The emperor, upon hearing of this refusal, was initially puzzled, then impressed by the master's integrity. He did not extend the invitation again, recognizing something profound in Taigu's response. Years later, Master Taigu was heard to remark to his students, "Had I responded to the imperial summons, our school would likely have fallen into the dirt. True teaching cannot be commanded or displayed on demand." The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." What emerges from this story is a teaching about the incorruptible nature of authentic spiritual authority and the dangers of seeking validation from worldly power. Why do we so often compromise our deepest principles when offered recognition or status? Zen Buddhism reveals that this tendency stems from what is called gaining mind, the ego's constant hunger for external validation and advancement. This mindset transforms spiritual practice into a commodity to be traded for social position, wealth, or influence. Our culture particularly struggles with this dynamic. We live in a society that equates worth with achievement, recognition with reality, and external success with inner fulfillment. The spiritual path becomes another arena for competition, another way to accumulate impressive credentials or associations with powerful people. Consider how often we modify our authentic expression to gain approval from those we perceive as having authority over our lives. A teacher dilutes their message to avoid challenging students. An artist compromises their vision to secure a prestigious exhibition. A spiritual practitioner adopts fashionable teachings rather than following their genuine understanding. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi observed, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." When we become attached to being seen as experts, as people worthy of imperial invitations, we lose the fresh, humble awareness that allows genuine wisdom to flow through us. The deeper teaching here shows us that true spiritual authority cannot be granted by external sources, no matter how exalted. It arises naturally from direct realization and expresses itself through humble service to truth, rather than accumulation of prestigious positions. When we understand this, we become like Master Taigu, eternally the host, offering wisdom freely to sincere seekers, while remaining unswayed by offers of worldly elevation. Taigu's refusal wasn't arrogance, but profound humility. He understood that the moment he accepted the role of court entertainer, performing wisdom for imperial approval, he would cease to be an authentic teacher and become merely another ornament of power. Tonight, as you reflect on areas where you might be seeking external validation for your inner work, can you identify where your authentic voice gets compromised for the promise of recognition? Can you find the courage to remain the host of your own truth, offering your gifts freely while staying unattached to how they are received by those in positions of worldly authority? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. True spiritual authority increases through generous sharing, not through association with power. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story about perception's power to create reality. This is the tale of the eggplant in the dark. In a mountain monastery where silence was treasured, there lived a monk renowned for strict adherence to Buddhist precepts. His devotion was unwavering, his meditation exemplary, his commitment to non-violence absolute. For years, he had walked the path with careful attention to every rule, finding comfort in structure and certainty. One moonless night, returning from evening meditation, he walked slowly along the garden path to his quarters. The darkness was complete, broken only by faint outlines of familiar landmarks. He knew this path intimately, yet tonight something felt different. Suddenly, his foot came down on something soft and yielding. The object made a distinct squishing sound that pierced the quiet like a bell. The monk froze, his heart racing as his mind conjured the most likely explanation. He had stepped on an egg-bearing frog. The realization struck like a physical blow. The first precept forbids taking life, and here he was, a dedicated practitioner, having just killed a pregnant creature. Not only had he taken one life, but potentially dozens. Horror washed over him in waves. His hands trembled as he knelt in darkness, trying to determine what happened, but the night was too black to see. His mind spun with questions and recriminations. How could he have been so careless? Was this a spiritual test he had failed catastrophically? Sleep became impossible. When he finally lay down, his mind churned with guilt and self-doubt. In his dreams, hundreds of frogs appeared, their eyes accusatory, demanding justice for their fallen mother and unborn siblings. They surrounded him, voices rising in condemnation that echoed through his consciousness. The monk woke repeatedly, each time remembering anew what he believed he had done. His carefully cultivated peace was shattered, replaced by torment that grew stronger with each passing hour. He questioned not only this moment, but his entire spiritual practice. As dawn broke, painting the monastery gardens in soft golden light, the monk returned to face the reality of his actions. His steps were heavy with dread as he approached the familiar path. But when morning light revealed the truth, the monk stopped in complete astonishment. There lay not the remains of a frog, but an overripe eggplant that had fallen from the monastery garden. The purple vegetable had split open when he stepped on it, creating the squishing sound that triggered his night of anguish. In that moment of recognition, something extraordinary happened. The monk felt a sudden shift in understanding that went far beyond relief. For the first time in years of study, he truly grasped the teaching that there is no objective world. His entire night of suffering had been created not by external reality, but by his mind's interpretation of an ambiguous experience. Standing in the garden, looking at the harmless eggplant, the monk finally understood how to practice Zen. It wasn't about perfect adherence to rules or avoiding all error. It was about seeing clearly, without the distortions of assumption and mental elaboration. The Buddha once said, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This teaching captures what the monk discovered. Our experience of reality is largely created by mental interpretations rather than objective circumstances. The deeper teaching here shows us how powerfully perceptions shape emotional reality. The monk's actual experience was minimal, stepping on something soft in darkness. Everything that followed was generated entirely by his mind's interpretation of that simple sensory event. Why do we construct elaborate stories from incomplete information? Our minds evolved to make rapid assessments for survival, often filling gaps with worst-case scenarios. This mental habit served our ancestors well when danger was immediate and physical, but creates unnecessary suffering when applied to modern psychological situations. Consider how often you step on metaphorical eggplants in the dark. Your friend doesn't return your text immediately, and you assume you've offended them. A colleague seems distant in a meeting, and you convince yourself they're angry about your presentation. Your partner comes home quieter than usual, and you imagine relationship problems that may exist only in your worried mind. Each scenario follows the same pattern: ambiguous sensory input, followed by mental interpretation, followed by emotional reaction to the interpretation rather than the actual event. We suffer not from what happens, but from what we think about what happens. Zen, Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The monk had become an expert in following rules, but a beginner in seeing clearly. His expertise actually became a limitation when it caused him to jump to conclusions based on preconceptions. This story invites us to examine our tendency toward premature interpretation. How often do we create our own nightmares by assuming the worst about ambiguous situations? How much daily stress comes from responding to imagined scenarios rather than actual circumstances? Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable ambiguities of human interaction, can you remember the monk and the eggplant? When your mind begins constructing stories about unclear situations, can you step back and ask, what do I actually know for certain, and what am I adding through interpretation? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, doubt everything, find your own light. The monk's awakening came not from following external rules more perfectly, but from discovering the clarity that was always available within him. Our next story is about the creative wisdom that emerges when we stop resisting life's persistent challenges and instead find ways to transform them. This is the ghost-proof mosquito net. Master Sengai sat in his modest quarters, rubbing his arms and neck with obvious frustration. For the third time in recent months, thieves had stolen his mosquito net, leaving him defenseless against the relentless summer insects that plagued the temple grounds. Each evening brought fresh torture as mosquitoes found their way inside his bedding, buzzing and biting throughout the night, making peaceful sleep impossible. To tell you the truth, the master confided to two elderly women who had come to visit him, I've already had my mosquito net stolen 3 times. His weathered face showed genuine exasperation as he continued. Every night, I pull the bedding over my head for protection, but somehow a mosquito always manages to hide inside and chew me up while I sleep. It itches like crazy. He grimaced comically, demonstrating by scratching various parts of his body. The two women, moved by compassion for their beloved teacher's predicament, expressed great sympathy. They could see the red welts on his arms and the dark circles under his eyes from sleepless nights. "Master," one of them said earnestly, "surely there must be something we can do to help." Sengai's eyes suddenly brightened with an idea that seemed to amuse him greatly. "Ladies, if you're willing, I have a plan." Grinning broadly with obvious delight in his scheme, he continued, "Could you make me an all-white mosquito net? Plain white fabric, nothing fancy, but sturdy enough to keep the insects out." "Yes, certainly," the old ladies agreed immediately. Pooling their modest savings, they purchased fine white cloth and spent several days creating exactly what the master had requested. They brought it to him with great pride, pleased to help solve his mosquito problem. Master Sengai received the gift with obvious joy and immediately set to work with brushes and black ink. On the net's sides, he painted elaborate depictions of death's heads, ghosts, and skeletal figures. Across the top, he created a terrifying image of the thunder god surrounded by jagged streaks of lightning. At the corners, he added overturned lanterns, weathered gravestones, ghostly hands reaching from shadows, and various funerary objects. When his artistic work was complete, he hung the net and stepped back to admire his creation. "Well, that should do the trick," the master announced with satisfaction and laughter. That very night, as if drawn by fate, 2 thieves approached the temple carrying dim lanterns. Master Sengai was already sleeping peacefully inside his newly decorated mosquito net. The thieves silently slid aside the paper screens and slipped into his room. But when they directed their lantern light toward the net, expecting to see simple white fabric, they suddenly beheld what appeared to be a terrifying ghost standing before them in the darkness. Trembling with fear, but still greedy for their prize, one thief mustered enough courage to approach the net with his knife, preparing to cut it down from its hanging position. At that precise moment, Sengai began banging his metal washing basin while shouting in a voice that filled the night, "The god of thunder is here before you!" Terrified beyond reason, both thieves ran screaming into the darkness, never to return to the temple again. The Buddha taught, what we think, we become. What we feel, we attract. What we imagine, we create. Here we discover a teaching about the transformative power of creative response to persistent problems. This story reveals something profound about our typical approaches to life's recurring difficulties. Most of us, when faced with the same problem repeatedly, tend to respond in predictable patterns. We get frustrated, we complain, we try the same solutions again and again, hoping for different results. We rarely step back and ask ourselves, what creative approach might transform this entire situation? Master Sengai could have responded to his stolen mosquito nets in numerous conventional ways. He might have increased security around the temple, posted guards, or installed better locks. He could have purchased cheaper nets that wouldn't attract thieves, or simply accepted sleepless nights as part of monastic austerity. Instead, he chose a response that was both practical and deeply creative, one that solved the immediate problem, while also revealing something profound about the nature of fear, perception, and deterrence. This approach reflects a fundamental principle of Zen wisdom. When we stop fighting against the nature of a problem and instead work creatively with its energy, entirely new solutions become possible. The thieves were drawn by greed to steal what appeared valuable. By making the net appear frightening rather than valuable, Sengai redirected their motivation rather than simply trying to overcome it with force or security measures. We can observe similar patterns of creative problem solving in many areas of life. A parent dealing with a chronically messy child might transform cleanup time into a game rather than a battle. A business facing customer complaints might redesign their service approach entirely rather than simply defending their existing methods. A person struggling with anxiety might learn to work with their nervous energy creatively rather than constantly fighting against it. Zen teachings illuminate another aspect of the story through the concept of expedient means, using whatever methods are most effective for each particular situation, even if they seem unconventional or surprising. Sengai's ghost-painted mosquito net represents perfectly tailored wisdom. He understood exactly what would deter these particular thieves and created a solution that matched their psychology rather than his own preferences. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that problems require serious, conventional solutions. We rarely consider whether humor, playfulness, or creative expression might be more effective than direct confrontation. Sengai's obvious delight in his scheme reveals another teaching, that effective solutions can also be enjoyable and artistically satisfying. The story also points us toward understanding the power of perception in determining reality. The net was the same physical object, whether plain or decorated, but its meaning and impact were completely transformed by Sengai's artistic additions. This reveals how often our problems exist not just in external circumstances, but in how we and others perceive and interpret those circumstances. Tonight, as you consider persistent problems in your own life, can you identify patterns where you've been trying the same approaches repeatedly without success? What would it look like to step back and consider entirely creative solutions that work with the natural energies involved rather than against them. The Buddha said, "In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. By approaching our difficulties with creative flexibility rather than rigid assumptions, we often discover that the most effective solutions were hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to see beyond our conventional thinking. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the nature of judgment and hidden knowledge. This is the story of the feast that revealed more than anyone expected. Zen master Dario received an invitation to dine at the estate of a wealthy landowner, a man known throughout the province for his generosity and elaborate entertainments. The invitation specified that many other Buddhist monks would be present, making it both a social gathering and an opportunity for spiritual discourse. Dario accepted graciously, looking forward to the fellowship and conversation. On the appointed evening, Dario arrived at the magnificent estate to find a grand feast prepared. Dozens of monks from various temples had gathered in the spacious dining hall, their saffron and brown robes creating a sea of contemplative presence. The atmosphere was warm and reverent as the guests took their places on cushions around low tables, laden with an abundance of dishes. Someone in the household, perhaps a mischievous servant or a family member with a twisted sense of humor, had decided to test the monks' adherence to their vows. Unknown to the guests, fish had been prepared and artfully disguised within several dishes, mixed with vegetables and seasoned to mask its true nature. Buddhist monks traditionally abstain from eating flesh of any kind, considering it contrary to their vow of non-harm to all living beings. As the meal progressed, one by one, the monks began to recognize the forbidden ingredient. Some detected the texture, others the subtle taste that no amount of seasoning could completely hide. Each monk who made this discovery quietly set down his chopsticks and politely declined to continue eating those particular dishes, maintaining their vows despite any hunger or social awkwardness this might cause. All except Zen Master Dario. He continued eating with apparent enjoyment and complete equanimity, seeming not to notice anything unusual about the food. His fellow monks watched with growing concern and confusion. How could such a respected teacher be unknowingly violating his vows? Should someone alert him to what he was consuming? Finally, a monk seated beside Dario could bear it no longer. Discreetly tugging at the master's sleeve, he whispered urgently, "Master Dario, that dish contains fish flesh." Dario paused, set down his chopsticks, and looked directly into the concerned monk's eyes. His response was gentle but penetrating. "And how, my friend? Do you know what fish flesh tastes like?" The monk's face flushed red as the implication of Dario's question sank in. To recognize the taste of fish so readily, the monk himself must have intimate familiarity with it. The very knowledge that allowed him to identify the forbidden food revealed his own past consumption of it. In pointing out Dario's apparent transgression, he had inadvertently exposed his own. A profound silence settled over the nearby diners as they absorbed this exchange. The master's words hung in the air like incense, spreading their wisdom beyond the immediate conversation to touch everyone within hearing. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." The heart of this lesson lies in how quickly we rush to judge others while remaining blind to our own contradictions. Why do we so readily notice the faults of others while overlooking our own? Zen Buddhism explains that judgment serves as a psychological defense mechanism that protects us from examining our own behavior too closely. When we focus on others' failings, we create the illusion of our own superiority and avoid the uncomfortable work of honest self-reflection. The monk who pointed out the fish thought he was helping his teacher maintain moral purity. But Dario's response revealed a deeper teaching about the nature of knowledge and experience. To recognize something immediately often indicates familiarity with it. The very expertise that allows us to spot certain behaviors in others frequently comes from our own past engagement with those same behaviors. Consider how often throughout your day you might find yourself noticing and internally criticizing others' actions. The driver who cuts you off, the colleague who takes credit for others' work, the friend who interrupts conversations. What would happen if each time you felt that familiar surge of judgment, you paused to ask yourself, how do I know to recognize this behavior so quickly? This practice isn't about becoming paralyzed by self-doubt or avoiding all moral discernment. Rather, it's about approaching others with the humility that comes from recognizing our shared humanity. As Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi observed, each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. This encompasses both ourselves and those we might be tempted to judge. Dario's calm consumption of the fish might have stemmed from various motivations. Perhaps he chose not to embarrass his hosts by making a scene. Perhaps he understood that the intention behind eating matters more than the act itself. Perhaps he was demonstrating that true spiritual freedom sometimes means transcending even religious rules when compassion calls for it. Or perhaps he was teaching through his subsequent response that pointing out others' transgressions often reveals more about the pointer than the pointed at. What emerges from this story is the recognition that moral authority doesn't come from perfect adherence to rules, but from the wisdom and compassion with which we respond to complex situations. The monk who identified the fish was technically correct about Buddhist dietary restrictions, but Dairyo's response pointed to a more profound spiritual truth about judgment, knowledge, and humility. We can also observe how this teaching applies to our modern tendency toward moral certainty in social media and public discourse. How easily we share articles criticizing others' behavior, how quickly we join in collective judgment, how readily we assume our moral framework is obviously correct. Dario's question invites us to pause and examine what our quick judgments reveal about our own experience and conditioning. Tonight, as thoughts of others' failings arise in your mind, can you hear Dario's gentle question echoing in your consciousness? Can you transform moments of judgment into opportunities for self-reflection and humility? As the Buddha taught, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. When we approach others' apparent failings with curiosity about our own reactions, rather than certainty about their wrongness, we create space for the compassion that heals both judge and judged. Let us now turn to a story about the difference between seeing and being seen, between wisdom and the appearance of wisdom. This is the tale of the blind man and his lantern. Late one evening, as darkness settled over the village like a soft blanket, a blind man prepared to walk home after spending the day with a dear friend. They had shared tea, conversation, and the comfortable silence that comes between people who truly know each other. But now, the hour was late, and the blind man needed to make his way through the winding streets to his own home. As he prepared to leave, feeling around for his walking stick and adjusting his cloak against the night air. His friend looked out at the pitch-black streets with concern. "Please," the friend said kindly, "let me give you my lantern to carry with you. The streets are particularly dark tonight, and there are many obstacles along the way." The blind man paused, surprised by the offer. "Why would I need a lantern?" he asked with gentle amusement. "You know I cannot see. The light won't help me find my way any better than darkness would. My feet know these streets, and my other senses guide me just fine." "Ah," his friend replied thoughtfully, "but perhaps the lantern isn't for you to see better. Perhaps it's so that others will see you better and won't accidentally bump into you as they hurry through the dark streets." This reasoning made perfect sense to the blind man. While he had learned to navigate the world without sight, he understood that others depended on their eyes and might not notice him in the darkness. "Of course," he said, accepting the lantern gratefully. "How thoughtful of you." The lantern was a simple but beautiful thing, made of rice paper stretched over delicate bamboo strips, with a candle secured safely inside. His friend lit the candle, and the warm glow illuminated a circle of ground around the blind man's feet. Even though he couldn't see the light himself, he could feel its warmth and knew that others would see him coming from a good distance away. Off he went into the night, the lantern swinging gently at his side as he made his way along the familiar path toward home. He felt confident and considerate, knowing that he was taking care both of his own safety and the safety of others who might be traveling these same dark streets. But he had walked only a few yards when suddenly, crack, another traveler walked straight into him. The collision was jarring, sending both men stumbling. The blind man's lantern swayed wildly, and he nearly lost his balance. "Why don't you watch where you're going?" the blind man called out indignantly, steadying himself and adjusting his robes. "Can't you see this lantern? I'm carrying it specifically so people like you won't bump into me." The other traveler, equally surprised by the collision, looked at the blind man's lantern and couldn't help but laugh. "My friend," he said gently, "why don't you light the candle? Your lantern is completely dark." The blind man reached toward his lantern and felt around the bamboo frame. Sure enough, the candle had gone out shortly after he left his friend's house, though he had been completely unaware of it. He had been walking through the darkness, carrying what he believed was a source of light, but was actually just an empty container, no more illuminating than if he had carried nothing at all. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils the profound difference between carrying the container of wisdom and carrying wisdom itself. Why do we so often mistake the form of understanding for understanding itself? Zen Buddhism reveals that we frequently become attached to the external symbols of insight, the books we've read, the retreats we've attended, the spiritual concepts we can discuss, while the actual flame of awareness remains unlit within us. The blind man's situation is deeply familiar to anyone who has walked a spiritual path. We acquire the lantern of teachings, surround ourselves with the framework of practice, and assume that possessing these things means we are illuminated. But unless the candle of direct experience is actually burning, we're still walking in darkness while believing we carry light. Consider your own spiritual or philosophical understanding. How much of what you believe you know is actually lived wisdom, and how much is merely conceptual knowledge you're carrying around like an unlit lantern? The difference becomes apparent only when we encounter the inevitable collisions of real life, moments when our understanding is tested by actual circumstances. In Zen practice, we distinguish between knowing about and knowing directly. You can study everything ever written about the taste of an apple, but until you actually bite into one, your knowledge remains second-hand. Similarly, we can accumulate vast knowledge about peace, compassion, or wisdom without ever actually embodying these qualities. The blind man was sincere in his intentions. He genuinely wanted to help others see him and avoid accidents. But his good intentions couldn't substitute for the actual function of a lit candle. This is the challenge of all spiritual practice, not just wanting to be wise or appearing to be wise, but actually cultivating the direct experience that makes wisdom real. Zen master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." The lantern represents our self-concept as someone who is wise, spiritual, or enlightened. As long as we're primarily concerned with maintaining this identity, the actual candle of genuine insight remains unlit. The traveler who bumped into the blind man wasn't being cruel when he pointed out the obvious. Sometimes we need others to help us see that our candle has gone out, that we've been coasting on old understanding, without tending to the flame of present moment awareness. Look deeply at your own experience. When do you find yourself carrying an unlit lantern? Perhaps it's when you offer advice you haven't fully integrated yourself, when you speak about peace while feeling agitated inside, or when you present yourself as having figured out something you're still actively struggling with. These aren't moral failures. They're simply signs that it's time to relight the candle. The beauty of this teaching is that discovering our lantern is dark isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. The moment we realize we've been walking in darkness while believing we carried light, we can stop, find a source of flame, and actually illuminate our path. The lantern itself isn't useless. It just needs the essential element that makes it functional. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual practices, we encounter this same dynamic repeatedly. We develop the outer forms of expertise, the vocabulary, the credentials, the appearances of mastery, but sometimes lose touch with the living essence that originally inspired us. The marriage counselor, whose own relationship is struggling, the teacher who has stopped learning, the spiritual practitioner who has become rigid in their practice, all are carrying unlit lanterns. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. One moment of genuine presence, authentic compassion, or real understanding illuminates more than years of accumulated concepts. The lit candle, however small, provides actual guidance in a way that the most beautiful empty lantern cannot. Zen practice continually asks us to check whether our candle is actually burning. Are we speaking from direct experience or from memory? Are we acting from present awareness or from habit? Are we offering genuine warmth and illumination, or just the appearance of these qualities? This isn't about achieving perfection or never having our candle go out. Candles extinguish naturally. That's their nature. Wind blows them out. They burn down. They flicker and fade. The practice is in noticing when the light has gone out and having the humility to relight it rather than pretending it's still burning. Tonight, as you consider the various roles you play and the wisdom you believe you possess, can you honestly assess which lanterns in your life are actually lit? Where are you carrying genuine understanding? And where might you be relying on the mere appearance of insight? Can you find the courage to acknowledge the dark lanterns without shame, seeing them simply as opportunities to rekindle authentic understanding? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, Three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Eventually, the darkness of an unlit lantern reveals itself through collision with reality. But rather than waiting for these inevitable bumps, we can choose to tend our inner flame with the same care we would give to any precious light, knowing that when it burns brightly, it illuminates not only our own path, but helps others find their way as well. Now, let us explore a story about fearlessness and the power that comes from accepting what cannot be changed. This is the encounter between the general and the Zen master who could not be moved. During the violent civil wars that tore through feudal Japan, armies swept across the countryside like natural disasters, conquering villages and controlling territories through force and intimidation. When word spread that a particular warlord's army was approaching, most people would flee with whatever possessions they could carry, seeking safety in the mountains or with relatives in distant towns. In one small village, as the dreaded army drew near, the familiar pattern repeated itself. Families packed hastily, merchants closed their shops, and within hours, the streets that had been busy with daily life stood empty and silent. Everyone had fled. Everyone, that is, except the old Zen master who lived in the simple temple at the village center. When the conquering army arrived and found the village deserted, the general was surprised to discover smoke still rising from the temple chimney. Curious about who would have the audacity, or perhaps the foolishness, to remain when everyone else had fled, he decided to investigate this anomaly personally. The general approached the temple with several of his lieutenants, expecting to find either a frail old man too weak to flee, or perhaps someone who had been unable to escape in time. What he found instead was the Zen master sitting peacefully in his garden, tending to his plants as if nothing unusual was happening around him. The general had grown accustomed to fear and submission wherever his army went. Village leaders would prostrate themselves before him, pleading for mercy and offering tribute in hopes of avoiding destruction. Citizens would cower and flee at the mere sight of his soldiers. This old man's calm indifference to his presence was both puzzling and irritating. When he wasn't treated with the deference and submissiveness to which he was accustomed, the general's face darkened with growing anger. Here was someone who didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation or respect the power he represented. "You fool!" the general shouted, his voice echoing through the empty courtyard as he reached for his sword. His elaborate armor gleamed menacingly in the afternoon light, and his hand gripped his weapon with practiced ease. "Don't you realize that you are standing before a man who could run you through without blinking an eye?" The threat that had terrorized countless others left the master completely unmoved. He continued his careful tending of a small flowering bush, his hands steady and his expression serene. When he finally looked up at the general, it was with the same calm attention he had shown before, as if greeting any ordinary visitor to his garden. "And do you realize," the master replied with perfect equanimity, "that you are standing before a man who can be run through without blinking an eye?" The general stood speechless, his sword half drawn. His anger suddenly dissolved into something approaching awe. In all his years of warfare and conquest, he had encountered many forms of courage. The desperate bravery of cornered soldiers, the defiant rage of defeated enemies, the foolish boldness of young warriors. But he had never encountered anything like this. Complete acceptance without fear. Total peace in the face of death. The master's response revealed something the general had never considered, that there could be a power greater than the ability to kill, and that was the complete absence of fear about being killed. Here was someone who had so fully accepted the temporary nature of existence that even the threat of immediate death held no power over him. Slowly, the general returned his sword to its sheath. Without another word, he turned and walked away from the temple, leaving the master to continue his gardening in peace. The village remained untouched by the war, not because of any military strategy or negotiated protection, but because of one man's absolute fearlessness. As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence. Here we discover the profound power that emerges when we fully accept this fundamental truth, rather than spending our lives trying to escape it. Why does complete acceptance of mortality create such presence and authority? Zen Buddhism reveals that most of our fear comes not from external threats, but from our desperate clinging to what is inherently temporary. When that clinging dissolves, the threats themselves lose their power to disturb our inner peace. The general's power came from others' fear of death and loss, but someone who has fully accepted the temporary nature of existence cannot be threatened with what he has already willingly released. The master's fearlessness wasn't bravado or indifference. It was the natural result of understanding impermanence so completely that even his own death held no terror. Consider your own relationship with threats and intimidation in daily life. How much of your fear comes from attachment to maintaining your current circumstances, preserving your reputation, or protecting your physical comfort? The master's response suggests that true invulnerability comes not from being untouchable, but from having nothing that can be taken away. This doesn't mean being passive or welcoming harm. The master wasn't seeking death or encouraging violence. Rather, his complete acceptance of mortality's inevitability freed him from the paralyzing fear that controls most people when facing genuine danger. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The master's single response contained more power than any threat because it came from a place of absolute acceptance, rather than resistance or fear. Tonight, as you consider the various pressures and threats you face, can you remember the master's profound response to the general's sword? Can you find the space where acceptance of impermanence creates not resignation, but a kind of unshakable presence that cannot be intimidated? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the whole secret of existence is to have no fear. True freedom comes not from avoiding danger, but from understanding so completely that we cannot ultimately be harmed, that external threats become powerless to disturb our essential peace. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the traps we create through our own grasping. This teaching comes to us through the ancient wisdom of those who observed both human nature and the natural world with equal clarity. In the tropical forests of Southeast Asia, where coconut palms sway in the ocean breeze and monkeys chatter among the emerald canopy, local hunters developed an ingenious method for capturing these agile creatures. The technique required no violence, no speed, and no superior strength. Instead, it relied upon understanding a fundamental aspect of the monkey's nature that would become its undoing. The hunters would select a coconut and carefully hollow out its interior through a small opening, leaving just enough space for their trap. Into this hollow chamber, they would place a handful of sweet rice, its aroma irresistible to any hungry monkey. The opening was crafted with precise dimensions, large enough for a monkey's open hand to reach inside, but too small for a clenched fist to withdraw. When a curious monkey discovered this strange coconut attached to a tree, it would investigate by reaching inside for the rice. The moment its fingers closed around the grains, it became trapped, not by any external force, but by its own unwillingness to release what it had grasped. The monkey could have freed itself instantly simply by opening its hand and letting go of the rice. But this solution seemed impossible from within its limited perspective. The hunters would find these monkeys sitting by their traps, sometimes for hours, pulling frantically at their trapped hands while refusing to release the very thing that held them captive. The rice that had promised nourishment became the source of their captivity. Their natural intelligence, so evident in other situations, seemed to abandon them when faced with the simple choice between holding on and letting go. What made this trap so effective wasn't its physical construction but its psychological design. It transformed the monkey's own grasping nature into the mechanism of its capture. The stronger the monkey pulled, the more trapped it became. The tighter it gripped the rice, the more impossible escape appeared. The Buddha taught, "You only lose what you cling to." This profound teaching points directly to the monkey's predicament and our own. The story illuminates how our attachments, no matter how seemingly small or justified, can become the very prisons that limit our freedom. Why do we hold so tightly to things that ultimately constrain our movement through life? Buddhist psychology identifies this pattern as the root of much human suffering. Our minds, like the monkey's instincts, are conditioned to grasp what appears beneficial and hold on regardless of consequences. We close our mental fists around possessions, relationships, identities, opinions, and even spiritual experiences, believing that our security depends on our grip strength. This grasping operates across every dimension of human experience. We cling to past versions of ourselves that no longer serve our growth. We hold on to resentments that poison our present happiness. We grasp at relationships beyond their natural seasons. We clutch at achievements and possessions as if they could provide lasting security. We even grip our spiritual insights so tightly that they become obstacles to further awakening. The coconut trap reveals how what we think will nourish us can become what confines us. The rice represents all those things we convince ourselves we cannot live without. Perhaps it's a particular lifestyle, a specific role or identity, a certain level of comfort, or even an image of how our spiritual journey should unfold. Like the monkey, we often cannot see that our freedom lies in simply opening our hand. Master Huang Po taught, "Nothing is gained by addition, nothing is lost by subtraction." This points to the liberating truth that our essential nature cannot be enhanced by accumulating things or diminished by releasing them. The monkey's true nature isn't improved by possessing rice, yet its conditioning makes release feel like loss rather than relief. Consider the coconut traps in your own life. What are you gripping so tightly that it prevents you from moving freely? Perhaps it's a job that no longer brings joy, but provides familiar security. Maybe it's a grudge that feels justified but weighs down your heart. It could be an image of yourself that once served you but now constrains your evolution. The practice of letting go doesn't mean becoming passive or uncaring. It means holding our preferences lightly, like water cupped in open palms rather than ice gripped in closed fists. When we release our desperate grasp on outcomes, we often discover that what we truly need flows toward us more naturally. Zen teacher Alan Watts observed that we suffer most when we confuse our maps with the territory. Our concepts about life, with life itself. The monkey cannot eat the concept of rice, yet it sacrifices its freedom for the illusion of possession. Similarly, we often sacrifice our peace for mental objects that exist more in our imagination than in reality. Tonight, as you notice the various things your mind tells you that you cannot release, can you experiment with gently opening your hand? Perhaps you'll find that letting go doesn't mean losing what matters, but discovering what freedom feels like. As the Buddha reminded us, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. The coconut trap teaches us that sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to open our grasp. Our next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant warfare between rival clans, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his comrades fell around him and defeat became inevitable, he was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield, his armor stripped, his weapons confiscated. That evening, they threw him into a dark, cramped prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with terrifying possibilities. Tomorrow, they would come for him. He knew the customs of war. First would come the interrogation, designed to extract information about his lord's defenses, troop movements, and strategic plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would resort to torture. Hot iron, bamboo splinters under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in hushed tones by other warriors. And when they had extracted what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the execution. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so violently he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind conjured increasingly vivid scenarios of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this torment. The warrior paced his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of impending doom that played repeatedly in his mind like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his despair, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master were sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real, it is an illusion. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How could tomorrow be an illusion when the threats were so concrete, so inevitable? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to penetrate deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window, a sound that spoke of the natural world, continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human conflict. In this moment, he was not being tortured. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so overwhelming moments before revealed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a profound peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady rhythm. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more confining than the stone walls around him, the prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we torture ourselves with endless scenarios about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds evolved as survival mechanisms, constantly scanning for threats and planning for protection. While this capacity serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental projections for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your anxiety stems from vivid imaginings of future scenarios that may never occur? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're awaiting, the difficult conversation you need to have. These situations exist primarily in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they transform into obsessive worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully predict or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen, but impermanence teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captors would show mercy. Perhaps diplomatic negotiations would secure his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention habitually goes and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than predetermined anxiety. When we truly inhabit the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never revealed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention transformed his entire experience. The same cell, the same uncertain future, but by returning to present moment awareness, suffering transformed into peace. This transformation is available to us in every moment of anxiety or fear. Tonight, as you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the temperature of the air, are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison and our own. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to trust life's current. This is the story of the Crystal River. In the depths of a great crystal river, where water flowed clear as mountain air, there lived an entire village of small creatures. The river's current moved above them like a gentle breath, carrying the wisdom of countless springs and distant seas. Young and old, rich and poor, all made their home along the sandy bottom, each creature grasping tightly to stones, branches, and roots. For generations, clinging had been their way of survival. Every creature learned from birth to wrap their appendages around river rocks and fallen wood. "Hold on," the elders would say. "The current is dangerous. It will sweep you away to places unknown. Safety lies in staying exactly where you are." But one small creature grew weary of this endless grasping. Day after day, he watched the current flow overhead, seeing how it moved with such purpose and grace. While his neighbors complained about the effort required to maintain their grip, he found himself wondering what it might feel like to trust that flowing water. "I am tired of clinging," he announced one morning. "Though I cannot see where it leads, I trust that the current knows its destination. I shall let go and allow it to carry me where it will, for I fear that if I continue clinging, I shall die of boredom before I ever truly live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Fool!" they cried. "Let go, and that current will tumble you mercilessly across the rocks below. You will be battered and broken, dying far more quickly than any boredom could kill you." But the small creature had made his decision. Taking one last look at his neighbors, he released his grip on the familiar stone. Immediately, the current seized him, and just as the others had predicted, he was tumbled and tossed across the rocky bottom. His small body struck stone after stone, each impact bringing pain he had never experienced while safely clinging. Yet something remarkable began to happen. As the creature continued to surrender to the current's power, refusing to grab for new anchors despite his pain, the water gradually lifted him higher from the dangerous bottom. The tumbling ceased. The rocks could no longer reach him. Now he flowed with the current itself, no longer fighting its direction, but becoming one with its movement. As he traveled downstream, creatures in distant parts witnessed something they had never seen. Here was one of their own kind, yet he appeared to be flying through the water, moving with the elegant power of the current itself. "See a miracle!" they called out. "A creature like ourselves, yet he soars. Surely he is the Messiah, come to save us all." The flowing creature heard their cries and felt compassion for their misunderstanding. "I am no more Messiah than any of you," he called back. "The river delights in lifting us all free, if only we dare to let go. Our true work is not clinging to the bottom, but embracing this voyage, this grand adventure of trust and flow." But the creatures only cried louder, "Savior, Savior!" Even as they spoke, they tightened their grips on rocks and roots. They watched until he disappeared around a bend, then began weaving legends about the miraculous Savior who had briefly graced their village. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives grasping for security and control, believing that our safety depends on holding tight to familiar circumstances. Yet in this very grasping, we create the suffering we seek to avoid. Why do we cling so desperately when the current offers to carry us toward unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from early childhood, we learn the known is safe and the unknown dangerous. This conditioning becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents growth beyond familiar limitations. We also suffer from the illusion of control believing that by grasping circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. This creates enormous tension because it puts us in opposition to reality itself. Life is constant movement, and when we resist this truth, we exhaust ourselves fighting currents far more powerful than our individual will. Consider the areas of your life where you find yourself clinging. Perhaps it's a relationship that has outgrown its original form, a career that no longer brings joy, or an image of yourself that now constrains your growth. The current of change will flow whether we resist it or not. Our choice is whether to exhaust ourselves in futile opposition or discover the grace available in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent except change." Water doesn't fight the mountainside. It finds the natural pathway down. When we learn to move with life's current rather than against it, we discover effortless effectiveness that rigid resistance can never achieve. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's stillness, what might you be ready to release? Perhaps it's a worry about tomorrow's challenges, a resentment from yesterday's disappointments, or a way of defining yourself that has grown too small. Can you feel into the current of this moment's aliveness and trust its direction? As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Relax right now and rest. In this trust, we discover that the current we feared would destroy us is actually the very force that can carry us home to our true nature. Now, let us explore a Zen story about creative compassion and the unexpected ways wisdom can serve practical human needs. This is the magical squash. The year had brought unusual hardship to the Hakata region. A cholera epidemic had swept through the area like wildfire, leaving communities paralyzed with fear and confusion about how the deadly disease spread and what could prevent it. In the midst of this crisis, old superstitions and desperate theories flourished as people grasped for any sense of control over their frightening circumstances. Among those affected by the epidemic's economic impact was the head of Hapiakuya, a merchant house that had made what seemed like a shrewd business decision earlier in the year. Anticipating high demand for squash during the harvest season, the merchant had invested heavily, purchasing enormous quantities of the vegetable from local farmers. Under normal circumstances, this investment would have yielded substantial profits. But these were far from normal circumstances. As fear of cholera spread through the community, a rumor began circulating that eating squash would increase one's susceptibility to the disease. Whether this belief arose from some misunderstood medical advice or simply from the panic that accompanies epidemic disease, it took hold with devastating effectiveness. Suddenly, no one would buy squash at any price. The merchant, watching his investment rot and his family's financial future crumble, arrived at Master Sengai's temple in obvious distress. "Your Reverence," he said, his voice heavy with desperation, "this year I expected big profits from squash, so I bought up huge quantities. But now people believe that eating squash will give them cholera, and nobody is purchasing anything. If I can't sell these vegetables, my family will be ruined financially. Please, you must help me." Master Sengai listened with genuine concern to the man's predicament. Here was a concrete human problem requiring immediate practical solution, not abstract philosophical discussion. "That's really terrible," he said with sincere sympathy. "Very well, I'll become your business manager and help you sell them. Please bring all your squash here to the temple." The merchant was bewildered by this unexpected offer. What could the Zen master possibly have in mind? How could a spiritual teacher succeed in selling vegetables that the entire community refused to buy? Nevertheless, having no better options, he dutifully loaded all his remaining squash onto carts and transported them to Shofukuji Temple. Master Sengai's solution was both brilliant and audacious. He piled all the vegetables prominently in front of the temple's main gate, where they couldn't be missed by anyone approaching the sacred grounds. Then he created a large sign with bold characters that read, "Magical Cholera Prevention Squash." Spreading his meditation mat alongside this impressive display, he sat down and began practicing zazen in full view of anyone passing by. The effect was immediate and remarkable. Word of the master's magical squash spread throughout the district with the same speed that the cholera fear had initially propagated. People began arriving from all directions, eager to purchase vegetables that were now perceived as protective medicine rather than dangerous food. The sight of the revered Zen master meditating beside his display added an aura of authentic spiritual authority to the entire enterprise. By noon, every single squash had been sold, and the merchant's financial crisis had been completely resolved. The firm of Hapiakuya was not only saved from ruin, but had actually profited more from this unusual marketing approach than they would have through conventional sales methods. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, skillful means adapts truth to the needs of the moment. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the creative application of wisdom to serve immediate human needs, even when this requires working with people's existing beliefs and limitations, rather than trying to educate them out of their misconceptions. This tale unveils something profound about the nature of compassionate action. Master Sengai could have responded to the merchant's crisis by delivering lectures about the irrationality of superstition, the importance of critical thinking, or the spiritual value of accepting financial loss with equanimity. Instead, he chose to work creatively within the existing situation to produce genuine relief for immediate suffering. The master's willingness to become a business manager reveals an understanding of spiritual practice that extends far beyond formal meditation and philosophical discussion. True wisdom expresses itself through whatever means are most effective for addressing real human problems, even if these means might appear unconventional or even contradictory to conventional spiritual image. Why do we often assume that spiritual people should remain aloof from practical concerns, especially those involving money and business? This assumption reflects a false dichotomy between sacred and secular activities that can prevent us from applying our deepest values to the situations where they're most needed. Master Sengai understood that relieving genuine suffering takes precedence over maintaining spiritual appearances. The genius of his solution lay in understanding that the community's fear was real and powerful, regardless of its medical accuracy. Rather than fighting against this fear or trying to educate people out of it, he redirected its energy toward a solution that served everyone's needs. The people got vegetables they believed would protect them, the merchant saved his business, and the community's overall nutrition actually improved. This teaching illuminates the difference between being right and being effective. The master probably understood that squash had no special power to prevent cholera, but he also recognized that arguing this point would have done nothing to solve the immediate crisis. By working with people's existing beliefs rather than against them, he achieved results that pure logic never could have accomplished. Zen practice cultivates what might be called adaptive wisdom, the ability to respond to each situation with whatever approach will be most genuinely helpful, rather than rigidly applying the same methods regardless of context. This requires a kind of ego flexibility that prioritizes outcomes over self-image, effectiveness over consistency. We can observe similar opportunities for creative problem-solving in many areas of modern life. The therapist who works with a client's existing framework, rather than insisting they adopt new therapeutic language. The teacher who meets students where they are emotionally and intellectually, rather than demanding they immediately embrace ideal learning attitudes. The leader who acknowledges team members' concerns, rather than dismissing them as irrational. This story also points us toward understanding the power of symbolic action and ritual in creating psychological change. The master's meditation beside the squash display wasn't just marketing theater. It was a genuine spiritual practice that infused the entire situation with sacred intention and authentic presence. Additionally, our minds tend to separate spiritual practice from practical problem solving, as if wisdom should only concern itself with eternal matters rather than immediate needs. Master Sengai's story demonstrates that authentic spirituality engages fully with whatever challenges arise, bringing creative intelligence and compassionate action to bear on concrete human difficulties. The transformation of dangerous squash into magical squash reveals another teaching about the power of framing and perception in determining reality. The vegetables themselves remained unchanged, but their meaning and impact shifted completely through the master's creative intervention. This suggests that many of our problems might be solved not by changing external circumstances, but by shifting how we understand and present them. Tonight, as you consider challenges in your own life or community, can you identify situations where creative reframing or working with existing beliefs might be more effective than direct confrontation or logical argument? What would it mean to prioritize genuine helpfulness over being right, or maintaining ideal consistency? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you want to know your past, look at your present. If you want to know your future, change your present. Through skillful, creative action that meets people where they are, rather than where we think they should be, we can transform seemingly impossible situations into opportunities for genuine benefit and mutual flourishing. Let us keep going on our journey through these Zen teachings with a story that takes us back to the very beginning of spiritual seeking, reminding us that the innocent questions of childhood often contain the deepest wisdom. This is the flounder. When Master Ryokan was just 6 or 7 years old, long before he would become known for his wisdom and gentle compassion, he was simply a small boy living in his family home and subject to the ordinary expectations and disciplines that parents impose on their children. Like all children, he sometimes struggled with the routines and demands of family life, occasionally testing the boundaries of what was acceptable behavior. One particular morning, young Ryokan had slept later than was considered appropriate for a child his age. In households of that era, early rising was not just a preference, but a moral expectation, reflecting values of industry, discipline, and proper character development that parents felt responsible for instilling in their offspring. When his father discovered that the boy had overslept, he responded with the kind of correction that was considered both normal and necessary for proper child rearing. But young Ryokan's reaction to this parental discipline was not the immediate contrition or apology that his father expected. Instead, the boy looked up at his father with an intense, unwavering stare that seemed to challenge the authority being exercised over him. This direct, unflinching gaze from his small son struck the father as inappropriate and even defiant. In a culture that valued respectful submission to parental authority, such bold staring could be interpreted as disrespectful confrontation rather than innocent curiosity or natural childhood response to discipline. Anyone who glares at his father like that, the father declared, with the conviction of someone delivering both punishment and prophetic warning, will surely turn into a flounder. This pronouncement wasn't merely an expression of parental frustration, but reflected traditional beliefs about the consequences of improper behavior and disrespectful attitudes toward one's elders. In the folk wisdom of the time, certain forms of moral transgression could literally transform a person into animal form, with the specific animal chosen reflecting the nature of the offense. Upon hearing his father's words, young Ryokan was immediately filled with terror. Unlike an adult who might dismiss such a statement as metaphorical or emotional exaggeration, the child took his father's declaration with complete literalness. The prospect of actually transforming into a flounder, losing his human form and becoming a flat fish, seemed not only possible, but imminent and inevitable. Without saying another word, the frightened boy fled suddenly from the house and disappeared into the surrounding countryside. He ran as far from his family home as his small legs could carry him, eventually making his way to a cliff overlooking the ocean, where he believed his transformation into a flounder would most appropriately take place. As the day progressed and young Ryokan failed to return home, the entire household became increasingly worried about his whereabouts. Family members and neighbors organized search parties to look for the missing child, checking all his usual hiding places and favorite spots for play, but finding no trace of him anywhere. The search continued through the afternoon and into the evening, with growing concern about the boy's safety and welfare. Finally, as darkness began to fall, the searchers discovered young Ryokan sitting alone and dejected on the cliff by the ocean, staring out at the waves that he believed would soon become his natural habitat. "What are you doing here?" the searchers called out to him when they found him in this remote and potentially dangerous location. "Everyone has been looking for you. Why did you run away?" Young Ryokan's response revealed both the innocent literalness of childhood understanding and the profound existential anxiety that can emerge from taking adult pronouncements about moral consequences at face value. Looking up at his rescuers with genuine puzzlement and disappointment, he asked the question that had been troubling him throughout his long vigil by the ocean. "Haven't I turned into a flounder yet?" Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding how the fresh, unfiltered perception of childhood can reveal profound truths about the nature of identity, transformation, and the power of belief that adult sophistication often obscures. This story unveils something beautiful and profound about the innocent directness with which children approach existential questions that adults typically avoid through layers of conceptual sophistication and psychological defense. Young Ryokan's literal interpretation of his father's warning led him directly into confrontation with fundamental questions about identity, punishment, transformation, and the nature of the self that lie at the heart of all spiritual inquiry. His question, "Haven't I turned into a flounder yet?" contains more genuine philosophical depth than many elaborate theological discussions. In his childish literalness, He was actually grappling with profound questions about the nature of identity and change that would later become central to his mature spiritual understanding. The boy's willingness to wait patiently for his expected transformation demonstrates the kind of complete acceptance and surrender that adult spiritual practitioners often struggle to achieve through years of meditation and study. He didn't resist or deny the possibility of becoming a flounder. He simply went to what seemed like the appropriate place and waited for it to happen. Why do we typically dismiss childhood questions about identity and transformation as naive, rather than recognizing them as profound spiritual inquiry? This tendency reflects our adult investment in maintaining stable concepts of selfhood that childhood curiosity naturally challenges. We prefer the security of fixed identity to the openness that allows for genuine transformation. Young Ryokan's response to his father's pronouncement reveals the double-edged nature of parental authority and the unintended consequences that can emerge from moral instruction delivered through dramatic metaphors rather than patient explanation. What was meant as corrective discipline became an existential crisis that led the child into direct confrontation with questions about the nature of change and identity. This teaching illuminates the profound receptivity and literal faith that characterizes childhood consciousness before it becomes filtered through adult skepticism and psychological defensiveness. The boy's complete belief in the possibility of transformation, while seemingly naive, actually demonstrates the kind of openness to radical change that authentic spiritual development requires. His vigil by the ocean represents something touching and profound about the human willingness to face anticipated consequences with courage rather than denial. Unlike adults who might try to rationalize away unwelcome possibilities or distract themselves from difficult realities, young Ryokan went directly to where he believed his transformation would occur and waited with patient acceptance. This story also reveals how often our deepest spiritual insights emerge from taking seriously questions and possibilities that conventional wisdom dismisses as impossible or irrelevant. The child's literal interpretation of metaphorical language led him into genuine contemplation of transformation and identity that most adults avoid through interpretive sophistication. We can observe similar dynamics in many areas where childlike directness reveals truths that adult complexity obscures. The innocent questions that cut through elaborate explanations to expose underlying assumptions. The simple observations that reveal the arbitrary nature of social conventions. The natural curiosity about existence that isn't yet constrained by concepts of what's reasonable to wonder about. Zen practice cultivates what might be called mature innocence, the ability to approach profound questions with the same fresh directness that young Ryokan brought to his father's pronouncement, while integrating adult understanding and discernment. This involves recovering the capacity for wonder and literal engagement with possibilities that sophisticated thinking often dismisses. The image of the small boy sitting alone by the ocean, waiting patiently to become a flounder, captures something essential about the spiritual journey itself. The willingness to go to the edge of our known world and wait there with openness for whatever transformation life might bring, even if that transformation challenges everything we think we know about who we are. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that spiritual maturity involves moving beyond the simple questions of childhood toward more complex and sophisticated understanding. But this story suggests that the deepest wisdom often involves returning to childhood's direct engagement with existential mysteries, informed by adult experience but not constrained by adult assumptions about what's possible. The story points us toward understanding that authentic transformation often requires the kind of radical openness to change that young Ryokan demonstrated, the willingness to wait patiently at the edge of the unknown, ready to become whatever life requires us to become, even if it challenges our most basic assumptions about our own nature. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship to transformation and change, can you recover some of young Ryokan's innocent willingness to take seriously the possibility of profound alteration in your own nature?
What would it mean to approach spiritual development with childlike openness to becoming something completely different from what you currently imagine yourself to be?
The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Through maintaining childlike openness to transformation, while developing adult wisdom and compassion, we discover that the deepest spiritual insights often emerge from the simplest questions about who we are and what we might become. The boy who wondered if he had turned into a flounder was already engaging with the fundamental koan of identity that would guide his entire spiritual journey: the recognition that what we are is far more fluid and mysterious than we typically imagine. Let us now explore a story about choice, responsibility, and the power we hold in every moment. This is the tale of the young man and the bird. A clever young student had grown tired of his teacher's seemingly wise responses to every question. He was convinced that the old master simply spoke in riddles to appear profound, and he decided to devise a test that would expose what he believed was mere pretense. After thinking for several days, he conceived what he thought was the perfect trap. One morning, the young man caught a small sparrow in the garden. The tiny bird trembled in his cupped hands, its heart beating rapidly against his palms. He held it carefully behind his back as he approached his teacher, who was sitting peacefully in the morning sunlight, reading ancient texts. "Master," the student called out with barely concealed excitement, "I have a question that will test your legendary wisdom." The old teacher looked up from his reading with patient, gentle eyes. He had seen this look of mischievous confidence in many students over the years, and he understood the young man's need to challenge authority as part of his own growth and learning. "Please," the teacher said simply, "ask your question." The student stepped closer, keeping the bird hidden behind his back. "Master, I hold a small bird in my hands. Using your great wisdom, tell me, is this bird alive or dead?" The young man felt incredibly clever. He had created what he believed was an impossible situation for his teacher. If the master answered alive, he would quickly snap the bird's neck and reveal the dead creature, proving the teacher wrong. If the master answered dead, he would simply open his hands and let the living bird fly away, again proving the teacher's lack of true insight. Either way, the student was certain he would expose his teacher's supposed wisdom as nothing more than lucky guessing and philosophical double talk. He waited eagerly for the response that would give him the satisfaction of finally outsmarting the old man. The teacher sat quietly for a long moment, not trying to peer behind the student's back or gather more information. His eyes seemed to look not at the student, but through him, as if perceiving something far deeper than the simple trick being attempted. Finally, with a gentle smile that held both compassion and understanding, the master spoke. "The answer, my young friend, is in your hands." The student stood frozen, his mouth hanging open slightly. In 3 simple words, His elaborate trap had been completely dismantled. The teacher hadn't fallen for either option of the false dilemma. Instead, he had pointed to something far more profound: the fundamental truth that the student himself held the power to determine the outcome. The young man looked down at his hands, still cupped behind his back, feeling the tiny bird's rapid heartbeat against his palms. He realized with startling clarity that the master was right. The bird's fate had never depended on the teacher's answer or supposed wisdom. It had always been entirely in the student's control. More than that, he began to understand that this was true about far more than just this moment. The power to choose life or death, creation or destruction, compassion or cruelty, all of it was always in his hands, in every situation, every day. Slowly, the young man brought his hands forward and opened them. The small bird sat still for just a moment, as if gathering itself, then spread its wings and flew into the blue sky, disappearing among the trees. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound responsibility that comes with conscious choice and the recognition that we are always the architects of our own experience. Why do we so often look outside ourselves for answers that can only be found within? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to seek authority figures who will tell us what to do, what to think, what to choose. But the deepest teaching is that true wisdom cannot be given from one person to another. It can only be discovered through our own conscious engagement with life. The student's question seemed to be about the teacher's insight, but it was actually about his own power. He was so focused on proving the master wrong that he almost missed the profound truth being offered, that every moment presents us with choices that shape not only our immediate circumstances, but our character and destiny. Consider your own daily decisions, both large and small. How often do you wait for someone else to tell you what the right choice is? How frequently do you seek permission, approval, or guidance for decisions that ultimately rest entirely in your own hands? The young man's bird represents all the power we hold, but sometimes fail to recognize. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual development, we constantly face moments where we hold something precious in our hands: the well-being of others, our own integrity, opportunities for growth or destruction. The outcome depends not on external circumstances or other people's wisdom, but on what we choose to do with the power we possess. The master's response reveals something crucial about authentic teaching. True teachers don't give answers. They point us back to our own capacity for wisdom. They help us recognize the choices we're already making and the power we already possess, rather than encouraging dependence on their authority. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "We are always in choice, even when we think we're not." The bird in the student's hands represents all the moments when we convince ourselves we have no options, no power, no responsibility. But consciousness always involves choice, and choice always involves responsibility. Look deeply at a current challenge in your life. Where are you waiting for someone else to provide answers, solutions, or direction? What would change if you fully recognize that the power to shape the outcome is already in your hands? This doesn't mean you have control over all external circumstances, but you always have choice about how you respond. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. Every thought, every intention, every action is like the student's choice with the bird, an opportunity to create life or death, beauty or suffering, wisdom, or ignorance? The answer is always in our hands. Tonight, as you consider the various situations in your life where you seek guidance or feel powerless, can you sense the truth the Master was pointing to? Can you feel the weight of the choices you carry every day, not as a burden, but as the fundamental dignity of conscious existence? As the Buddha observed, no one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. The bird flies free, not because of the teacher's wisdom, but because of the student's choice. In recognizing our own power to choose life over death, compassion over cruelty, truth over deception, we discover that the answer to every important question has always been in our hands. Now, let us explore a story about the paradoxical nature of spiritual seeing and the limits of conceptual understanding. This is the teaching of 3 strikes and deeper vision. In the mountain monastery, where the 6th patriarch Hui Neng taught, students came from across China to study with the master, whose realization was said to surpass all others of his time. Among these seekers was a brilliant young monk named Shen Hui, known for his sharp intellect and probing questions. Unlike many students who approached the patriarch with humble requests for basic instruction, Shen Hui often challenged the master with sophisticated philosophical inquiries. One afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the monastery windows and the air carried the peaceful sounds of monks going about their daily practice, Shen Hui found the 6th patriarch sitting quietly in the main hall. The master's posture was perfectly still, his breathing soft and natural, his expression serene yet alert, the embodiment of meditation in action. Seeing an opportunity to test his understanding against the master's realization, Shen Hui approached with a question that had been forming in his mind during his own meditation practice. The nature of perception during spiritual practice had become a source of great curiosity and confusion for him. "Hi, Master," Shen Hui said, bowing respectfully but speaking with the confidence of someone who believed his question particularly insightful. "When you sit in meditation, do you see or not?" To Shen Hui, this seemed like a perfectly reasonable inquiry into the mechanics of enlightened awareness. Did awakened consciousness involve special kinds of seeing? Did meditation reveal mystical visions or higher perceptions unavailable to ordinary minds? Or did true realization transcend seeing altogether, existing in some pure state beyond sensory experience? What he received in response was completely unexpected. Without warning, the 6th patriarch picked up his wooden teaching stick and struck Shen Hui 3 times in rapid succession, not gently, but with enough force that the blows stung sharply and left the young monk both physically uncomfortable and mentally bewildered. "When I hit you," the patriarch asked with the same calm tone one might use to discuss the weather, "does it hurt or not?" Shen Hui rubbed his smarting shoulders, his mind racing to understand what had just occurred. The question seemed simple enough, yet something about the context made him suspect that a straightforward answer might be inadequate. The physical sensation was undeniable, yet the spiritual implications felt complex. "It both does and does not hurt," he replied carefully, intuiting that the master was pointing towards some paradox beyond ordinary logic. "I both see and do not see," the 6th patriarch responded, his words carrying the weight of direct experience rather than philosophical speculation. But Shen Hui's intellect wasn't satisfied with paradox. He needed to understand the mechanics, to categorize and explain this teaching in terms his conceptual mind could grasp. "How can you both see and not see?" he pressed, genuine confusion evident in his voice. "That seems contradictory. Either you see during meditation or you don't. How can both be true simultaneously?" The patriarch's response came with the patience of someone who had spent decades helping students move beyond the limitations of dualistic thinking. "What I see," he explained with gentle clarity, "are the waverings and wanderings of my own mind. What I do not see is the right and wrong and good and bad of other people. This is my seeing and not seeing." With these words, the entire teaching crystallized. The master wasn't speaking about mystical visions or transcendent states, but about the fundamental shift in perception that accompanies genuine spiritual maturity. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This teaching relates profoundly to the patriarch's lesson about the nature of awakened seeing. Why do we become confused when spiritual teachings transcend ordinary logic? Zen Buddhism explains that our conceptual mind operates through dualistic categories: seeing or not seeing, pain or no pain, right or wrong. But enlightened awareness doesn't eliminate these experiences. It transforms our relationship to them. The deeper teaching here shows us what authentic spiritual perception actually involves. The patriarch sees his own mental processes clearly, the arising and passing of thoughts, emotions, and reactions. This isn't a mystical power, but the natural result of sustained mindfulness practice. He observes the waverings and wanderings of consciousness without being lost in them. Simultaneously, he doesn't see in the judgmental sense, imposing categories of right and wrong, good and bad onto others' behavior. This non-seeing isn't ignorance, but wisdom, recognizing that such judgments often say more about the observer than the observed. Look deeply at your own patterns of perception. How much of what you think you see in others actually reflects your own mental projections? When someone irritates you, are you seeing their actual behavior clearly? Or are you seeing your own triggers and reactions? When someone impresses you, are you recognizing their genuine qualities? Or are you seeing your own desires for approval or achievement? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between reactive perception and clear seeing. Reactive perception involves our past conditioning, our emotional needs, our judgmental habits. Clear seeing involves awareness that recognizes its own processes while remaining open to what's actually present. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." This teaching points to the same insight the patriarch offered. True seeing involves turning attention toward our own mental processes rather than fixating on external judgments and evaluations. The 3 strikes Shen Hui received weren't punishment, but skillful teaching. Physical pain that both does and does not hurt points toward the mystery of conscious experience itself. Pain arises in awareness, is felt fully, yet doesn't define or limit the awareness that experiences it. Similarly, thoughts and emotions arise in consciousness without contaminating its essential clarity. Consider how this teaching might transform your daily experience. Instead of constantly evaluating others' behavior, finding fault, making comparisons, generating opinions, what if you turned that same attention toward observing your own mental reactions? What patterns would you discover? in the wanderings and waverings of your own mind. This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our capacity for discernment. Rather, we develop the ability to respond from clarity rather than reactivity. When we see our own judgmental tendencies clearly, we naturally become less caught in them. When we observe our mental projections, we're less likely to mistake them for objective reality. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called mirror mind, awareness that reflects whatever arises without being stained or changed by it. This mirror sees everything clearly while maintaining its essential emptiness and openness. Tonight, as you notice your mind categorizing and judging the experiences of your day, can you remember the patriarch's teaching? Can you turn your attention toward the seer rather than constantly evaluating what is seen? Can you discover the freedom that comes from seeing your own mental processes without being enslaved by them? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." By learning to see our own mental patterns with compassion rather than judgment, we develop the clarity to see others with equal kindness and understanding. Let us now turn to a tale about the thin boundary between heaven and hell within our own hearts. This is the story of the samurai and the gates. In feudal Japan, a battle-hardened warrior named Nobushige sought out the renowned Zen master Hakuin. The samurai's armor bore the scars of countless conflicts, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much violence. He approached the master's simple dwelling with a question that had been burning in his mind since his last campaign. "Master Hakuin," Nobushige said, bowing stiffly in his heavy armor, "I have spent my life fighting for my lord, facing death countless times. Tell me truthfully, is there really a paradise and a hell awaiting us after death?" Hakuin looked up from his tea, studying the warrior with penetrating eyes. "Who are you to ask such a question?" he inquired calmly. "I am a samurai," Nobushige replied with pride, straightening his shoulders. "I serve my lord with honor and have never retreated from battle." Hakuin's expression suddenly shifted to one of disdain. "You, a soldier!" he exclaimed with a dismissive laugh. "What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Look at yourself. Your face looks like that of a common beggar, weathered and crude. How could someone so lowly claim to be a protector of nobility?" The words struck Nobushige like physical blows. His face flushed red with anger, and his hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. The insult to his honor was unbearable. "So, you have a sword," Hakuin continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your weapon is probably much too dull to cut off my head. I doubt you could slice through a rice paper screen, let alone defend anyone of importance." Unable to contain his rage any longer, Nobushige began to draw his sword, the steel singing as it emerged from its scabbard. His entire body trembled with fury. His vision narrowed to focus solely on this insolent monk who dared to question his honor. At that precise moment, as the blade caught the afternoon light, Hakuin spoke with sudden clarity. "Here, open the gates of hell!" The words pierced through Nobushige's rage like an arrow finding its target. In that instant, he saw himself clearly, consumed by anger, ready to kill over wounded pride, his mind clouded by fury. He understood that hell was not some distant realm, but the very state he inhabited in that moment. The samurai's hand froze on his sword as recognition dawned across his features. Slowly, with great reverence, Nobushige sheathed his sword, and bowed deeply before the master, his anger transformed into profound gratitude. "Here open the gates of paradise," Hakuin said gently, his voice now filled with compassion. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is a startling revelation about the geography of our inner world. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations, but present moment experiences we create through the quality of our consciousness. Why do we so easily find ourselves at the gates of hell? Zen Buddhism points to the three poisons that cloud our minds: greed, hatred, and delusion. When Nobushige's pride was wounded, hatred arose instantly, transforming a peaceful afternoon into a realm of suffering. His entire reality shifted from curiosity about the afterlife to murderous rage in mere moments. The deeper teaching here shows us that we carry within ourselves the capacity for both states. Paradise and hell are not places we go to after death. They are experiences we inhabit while living. Each moment offers us the choice between the hell of reactivity and the paradise of awareness. Consider how often throughout your day similar transformations occur. A critical email arrives, and suddenly your peaceful morning becomes a realm of anxiety and resentment. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and the spaciousness of your drive contracts into a tight knot of irritation. A thoughtless comment from a colleague, and your contentment dissolves into hurt feelings and defensive thoughts. In Zen practice, we cultivate the capacity to recognize these moments of transition. Like Nobushige drawing his sword, we learn to catch ourselves at the very moment we're about to enter hell through our reactions. This recognition itself becomes the key that opens the gates of paradise. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we're caught in reactivity, we're rejecting the present moment, the master's teaching, the opportunity for awakening in favor of our thoughts about how things should be. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Hakuin's apparent insults were not cruelty but compassion in disguise. By provoking Nobushige's anger so skillfully, he showed the warrior exactly what he needed to see. That hell is a state of mind we enter through our own choices. This teaching invites us to examine our own triggers. What words or situations instantly transport us to hell? Perhaps it's feeling unappreciated at work, being misunderstood by family, or facing unexpected challenges. Each of these experiences offers the same choice Nobushige faced. Will we draw our sword or recognize the teaching? Tonight, as you notice irritation arising in response to some frustration, can you remember Hakuin's lesson? Can you recognize the moment when you're about to enter hell through your reactions and instead choose the paradise of awareness? As the Buddha taught, what we think, we become. In each moment, we are either opening the gates of hell through unconscious reactivity or opening the gates of paradise through mindful presence. As our time together gently draws to an end, notice the quiet transformation that settled in while you listened. The calm and clarity you touched tonight are not distant treasures. They're a natural part of your own awareness, waiting patiently beneath the surface of ordinary life. The Buddha once said, "Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, people cannot live without a spiritual life." What you've discovered this evening is that peace doesn't depend on fixing every worry or arranging perfect conditions. Instead, it comes alive in those simple moments when you let go breathe fully, and meet the present with open eyes. Each story tonight was passed down to remind us. Ease follows when we loosen our grip on anxious thoughts, and relief arrives when we stop chasing after or fighting against every feeling. In the quiet that followed each tale, maybe you noticed a softening, an untying of knots, a gentler rhythm to your breath. Even if your mind wandered or your worries tried to return, the wisdom you've heard is quietly settling in, like rain nourishing the roots of a vast tree. Now, as you get ready to rest, consider that what you've learned isn't a distant promise, but a practical way of being. These teachings point us home to the present, to a steady heart and a mind at ease. In these silent moments before sleep, notice the difference. How your thoughts move more slowly, how your body feels heavier, how even challenges seem easier to face with a calm mind. Zen wisdom has always shown us that genuine understanding isn't locked away in rare texts or spoken only by distant masters. It lives in everyday things, in your breath, in a sip of tea, in the hush before sleep. Tonight, you've experienced that these truths are available right now, as close as your next breath. As you move from this gentle time into the world outside this moment, carry not just the stories, but the sense of peace they offered you. Let calm and insight be quiet companions through whatever comes tomorrow, and remember, you can always return to this feeling whenever you need. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk.